Creation of Earth, the Mountains, and the Moon. By John Baumgardner. Images used in this presentation were taken from the Internet. In looking at the rocks and mountains of West Virginia, I became curious on how they were formed. After several years of reading about plate tectonics and watching videos of how we got to where we are today, I determined that I would have to start at the beginning. My knowledge of the Bible is limited, but I was instilled with a belief in the Bible from an early age. I believe that most of what we know from many different scientific theories today may be true, but only partially. There are many theories, and I believe that some of them have merit, but that none are completely correct. I do believe that the Bible is an accurate historical document, but while it shares a lot, it was written for the believer who doesn't require it to be in detail. I am not a scientist or theologian by any stretch of the imagination, so these are simply my personal thoughts. I do believe that quite often science accidentally proves that the Bible is a factual account of what happened and when it happened. The theories I have considered: collision with something, planet called Theia. Plate tectonics, including catastrophic plate tectonics. Biblical accounts. I will start with the biblical accounts. The Bible teaches us that God created the heaven and earth and all that are in, around and on it in 7 days. I do believe this to be true, however I don't think that one of God's days is equal to one of ours. So I don't really subscribe to the young earth theories in the sense that I don't think 7 of God's days are the same as ours, but I also don't think there is a direct correlation between the ages of people then as compared to ours. But I also don't believe it's as old as science would have us believe. So how old is it? I have no idea. The Bible tells us that Noah lived to be 950 years old and that he had his first son at the age of 500 years. I am not questioning the ages as I believe them to be true, but I don't believe that the years or seasons were as long as ours are today. I believe that Earth was spinning faster and rotating the sun quicker, making the years much shorter, giving people who lived in that time frame much older ages. I do believe that the flood occurred just as accounted for in the Bible. I also believe that Noah was informed by God to build an ark to save the animal kingdom and humans that we know today. I am not sure of the timeline of when the moon is first mentioned in the Bible, but it does seem that after Noah, people didn't seem to live as long, but more on this later. I believe that when God created the heaven and the earth, that the earth was without the moon. Just the stars in the sky to give light at night as indicated in the Bible. Fourth day, Genesis 14-19. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a 4th day. Genesis 16 does seem to mention that there is a lesser light which many believe to be the moon, however it does say that the lesser light rules the night and stars. The moon doesn't rule or light up the stars, therefore I believe that the lesser light is still the sun and its reflection off the planets in our own solar system, as well as the light emitting from the stars naturally that can't be seen during the daylight hours is what is being discussed. Something I will touch on later is that the atmosphere may have been denser back then, and the sun's light may have been carried into the night via the atmosphere as a type of prism effect. This does however suggest that Earth was already in motion, spinning to give day and night. The seasons can't be determined by the moon, but it can by reading the stars and our planet's position based on its journey around the sun. The moon is actually not mentioned as a moon until much later in the Bible, but I honestly can't say for sure where. So, with that being said, I believe that the moon was not a part of the initial creation of Earth. Going backwards, on day 3 God created the seas and dry land. 3rd day, Genesis 9-13. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land, earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. And God said, Let the earth put forth grass, herb yielding seed, and fruit tree bearing fruit after its kind, wherein is the seed thereof, upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was, in itself, after his kind, and God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a third day. Genesis 6-8. And God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. On the second day God created the firmament. In Hebrew this translates to expansion, and I take this to mean the sky, and God called the firmament or expansion heaven. When I initially read God's work on the second day I misinterpreted it to mean the ground, but firmament is speaking of the sky, placing water in the heavens and on earth. The seas and our atmosphere was created. But were there seas, or was there water under the ground and water above us, and we were actually living in heaven? As we see on the third day, God gathered all the waters on earth in one place and let the dry land appear. It doesn't speak of separate continents, just dry land and water. I take this to mean that there was one large patch of land that was dry and ready for the creation to continue. On day 3 God seeded earth with plants and herbs. On day 4 God began to let the light shine onto earth so that the seeds that were planted could grow. I take this to mean that he cleared the air of dust and settled it to earth, allowing the sunlight to be effective for life to grow. On the 5th and 6th day God created the animals to roam and crawl upon the earth and humans. I believe these accounts to be factual, however I do believe that God's timeline of a day is much longer than a day as we now know. Plate tectonics and catastrophic plate tectonics. So how did the continents become divided, and where did the mountains come from? The current scientific theory maintains that over billions of years the continents as we know today drifted apart from one large continent called Pangaea. The way they did this was through a phenomenon called plate tectonics. Science says that the continents all split off from Pangaea, and through this division, and the continents slamming into each other caused uplift, forming the mountain ranges we see today. They say that the plates are still colliding into each other, causing some mountain ranges to continue to grow. My problem with this theory is that if all of the continents split from one huge continent, then it would seem there would be very little collision at all, rather simply a separation similar to that of a cracking eggshell or like cracks on a dry lake bed, only the void would be replaced by new earth. They also say that these tectonic plates only move at about 4 inches per year, or as fast as your fingernails grow. One website lists several, in my opinion very reasonable, problems with plate tectonics. Crustal GPS signals on the Earth do not support plate tectonics theory. Global GPS stations reveal that a vast majority of the GPS monitoring stations indicate that the observed motion is toward the Northwest Pacific Basin. Perhaps more surprisingly is the fact that the motions do not conform to rigid tectonic plates. But we do know that during the time of Pangaea there were animals on land because of fossil records found throughout various parts of the world that proves there was at one time one large inhabited continent. This seems to correlate to biblical records. God made dry land. It doesn't say that he separated the dry land into the continents we know today at the time of its creation. A person by the name of Dr. John Baumgardner, no relation, has come up with a theory called catastrophic plate tectonics. Mr. Baumgardner is a young Earth theorist and has engineered software to help illustrate his theory. Basically his explanation of his theory is a means of explaining the flood of Noah's time as explained in the Bible. His theory also partially explains how the mountain ranges were formed by a cataclysmic event that caused the plates to move very rapidly, thereby slamming into each other, building mountain ranges very rapidly instead of slowly as modern science would have us to believe. Mr. Baumgardner's theory is adamantly rejected by mainstream science, but in some ways I believe at least parts of it has merit. I do believe that the mountains were formed much more rapidly than the modern-day scientists or geologists would have you believe. But I can't quite see how the Appalachian Mountains were formed going from Georgia all the way up the east coast and into northern Europe. All of these mountains share similarities and appear to have been created at or around the same time frame. But I do believe that something must have happened, something major. Collision with a planet called Theia. There is a theory that Earth collided with a planet called Theia and that this collision may have actually been what created the Moon. Remember, I don't believe that the Moon was part of God's original creation as provided in Genesis. I also believe that at the time of the creation that Earth was spinning much faster than it currently is today. I also believe, based on reports of animal and plant life found in areas that are currently below glaciers, that the Earth was on a different axis. So what about this planet called Theia? It is hypothesized that Theia was a planet about the size of Mars and that it either struck Earth at a glancing blow or collided and coalesced into Earth to become one planet. I don't have the background to say which is correct, but I believe that Theia is most likely the cause for many things that has happened to Earth and maybe still happening today. I do believe that Theia struck Earth and completely combined with Earth, sending molten material into orbit around Earth. I believe that the material that was forced up from the collision became the Moon. The Apollo moon missions gathered rock from the face of the Moon, and studies of that rock indicate that the Moon's rocks are almost identical to those on Earth in composition and unlike rocks found on Earth from known asteroids and meteors. I believe that when Theia struck Earth that it forced the continent Pangaea to shatter like a plate. In a violent manner, first forcing areas together as it struck and then tearing them apart as Earth increased in size, causing water to flood the entire supercontinent that was being torn apart due to a bulge as a result of Theia's impact. Perhaps the violent impact created many of the features we know today. I also believe that Pangaea was not necessarily elongate from north to south as illustrations would suggest, rather that it may have been more along or maybe slightly above the equator, making it more conducive to life. Pangaea spinning north to south and only on one side of the planet would have caused Earth to be severely out of balance, especially if it was spinning faster. It is my thought that dry land mostly in the area conducive to life would have given Earth balance. It would seem to me that if you rotate Pangaea along the equator that there is a huge chunk of it missing. Perhaps the missing part of Pangaea is actually now part of the Moon. Also, the Moon in its current state causes a bulge in the water along the equator, and if it would have been in place at the time of God's creation could have covered the dry land. However, I have seen much discussion that if the Earth were spinning faster that it would also cause the water to be deepest at the equator. The Bible does say that the waters were gathered together in one place and let the dry land appear. More on weather conditions on Earth with it spinning faster later. After the collision, however, the remaining dry land may have been north to south, but only because of the movements of the plates and a change in Earth's axis. I believe that today's current tectonic plates are a result of the collision. I believe the impact happened in the current-day Pacific Ocean and that the strain of the Earth's crust consuming Theia caused the continental separation we know today. I believe the Pacific Ocean being the largest body of water on Earth, surrounded by volcanoes known as the Ring of Fire, and the Mariana Trench, the deepest known natural area on Earth, in the Pacific, is also a result of this collision. The shape of the islands in the area of Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, Indonesia and New Guinea seem to suggest some uplift or are the remnants of a large crater, as if a large strike such as Theia possibly entered at an angle or due to striking Earth as it was spinning very fast. This is coincidentally the area where the Mariana Trench is found. For example, the Earth spins counterclockwise, prograde. Let's assume that something struck Earth, Theia, that was also spinning counterclockwise, prograde. This would push soil up on one side of the impact site, slow the rotation of both planets, and would have caused the two planets to dig into each other. I think it would be this digging in action that would have kicked up the material to create the Moon as well as the Mariana Trench and the islands previously mentioned. If Theia would have been rotating retrograde or clockwise, the two planets would have rolled off each other as the two movements would have complemented each other and simply rolled away. Venus and Uranus are the only planets in our solar system that spin in retrograde. It is hypothesized that Venus did have a collision with some large object that made it what it is today. Maybe it is possible that it was also struck by Thea's spinning prograde that sent Venus to where it currently is in our solar system, and because they both spin in opposing directions simply deflected each other. It could be that when Thea struck Venus it all but stopped the rotation of Venus and sent Thea hurling and spinning very fast. Currently a day on Venus is 116.75 Earth days long. Back to Earth. I would think that the continents would have been pushed away in an opposite direction initially as Thea dug in, and then once coalescing had been completed would have pulled the continents apart as Earth swelled to accept the intruding planet. This would have initially created mountains from the squeezing the plates together and then pulling them apart. The continents of North and South America appear to have been pulled away from the continents of Africa and Europe, towards the impact area that would have caused the Pacific Ocean, with Mexico and South America showing curvature, as if they were pulled or dragged towards the impact site. Also noticeable is that the continental shelf of North and South America shows very little ocean shelf on the west and long continental shelves on the east side, which would seem to indicate the continents were dragged or pulled. Tectonic plate movement is for the most part still moving in the direction that I have estimated the impact. The soil and molten rock forced up by Thea therefore created the Moon. I believe the combination of like rotation of the two planets and the material from Earth and Thea being kicked up creating the Moon would have been enough to become an influence on Earth's rotation, slowing it further, and on the tides once again drawing the new divided continents. The impact shifted Earth's axis severely. The sudden slowing of Earth alone would have caused massive tidal waves as well as the impact itself. Material, molten rock, would have been returning to Earth as well, along with rapidly moving Earth's crust would have also caused massive movements of huge amounts of water. Waters of cataclysmic proportions trying to find its resting place once the action had stopped caused Earth's features we know and enjoy today. It would seem reasonable to believe that when the two planets collided that not only was the rotation of Earth slowed considerably but that the collision would have tilted the Earth's axis and made it wobble as it does today. The Moon may have taken a while to form completely as bits and pieces orbiting around our planet became one, but there must have been enough for it to have its own gravity. As discussed earlier, due to its gravity, the Moon controls our tides on Earth and causes a bulge around the equator. At the time of its creation that control over tides may have even been stronger as it was closer to Earth. At the time of formation the Moon was about 4 Earth radii distant. That is, it was orbiting about 15,000 to 20,000 miles away, as opposed to the current average distance of 238,000 miles. So, we now know that the Moon is moving away from us, not toward us, which in my mind proves that it was not captured as it went by from outer space. And considering the Moon's composition is almost identical to Earth's in matter, it would seem natural to assume it came from Earth. So it could be that we were not the first planet Thea had a run-in with and that it struck Venus then coalesced with Earth. Kind of like space billiards on steroids. An article at www.newscientist.com indicates that Proto-Earth may have had a day as short as 2.5 hours, which is much faster than our 24 or so hours. The website indicated that the people back then may have been much larger back as were the animals of that era such as dinosaurs. Is it possible that gravity was holding them onto Earth but that the centrifugal force would have made everything larger back then? Would this be the reason we had huge dinosaurs and giant people on Earth back then? Nephilim? As mentioned in the Bible. In several videos I have seen that fossils have been found that show very large animals that were found with legs broken off but that the animals still have food in their mouths. Is it possible that this was due to the reduction of centrifugal force making the animals much heavier as the Earth's rotation slowed rapidly? Dinos have hollow bones to make them lighter as do modern-day birds, but it would seem reasonable that with their massive size that the hollow bones wouldn't be able to support the weight without the help of centrifugal force. I had hypothesized earlier that the Earth was spinning faster than now, and this was probably the reason Noah and others lived so long. Information indicates that Noah lived to be 950 years old. If the Earth had a day of 2.5 hours and a similar number of days in the year, circling the Sun faster, divided by 24 hours you get 9.6. Divide Noah's age by 9.6 and you get 98, almost 99 years old. More similar to today's lifespans than 950. With this I am not disputing that Noah lived to be 950 years old, I am simply saying that I believe that the trips around the sun were much quicker. According to the timeline in Genesis, Noah was born in the year 1056 and Adam lived to be 930 years old. Noah lived 350 years after the flood, therefore if he died at 950 years old he would have been 600 years old at the time of the flood, which means that the flood occurred in the year 1656 divided by 9.6. The flood occurred 172.58 years after Adam was born. Climate at the time of creation. No rain? The Bible possibly teaches that there was no rain before the flood. Before any plant of the field was in the earth and before any herb of the field had grown. For the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground, Genesis 2-5,6. Even though this verse is speaking of the original creation, there is no mention that the conditions changed until the time of the flood. There is no reference to rain having occurred until the time of the deluge. This, however, is an argument from silence. The Bible only seems to indicate it did not rain before the fall, not before the flood. It is said that if the earth was spinning faster, that centrifugal force would cause the atmosphere to be denser than today. The weather would be stable and there would be a mist coming from the ground as a result. The area of the equator would be lush with fauna as the climate would always be warm and the ground always moist, which would be a perfect environment for plant growth. Eden. Heaven on earth. Questions. If the planet was spinning so quickly, how could life survive or thrive? I believe that Pangaea was along or close to the equator at the time and was all rearranged after the impact and the flood, but that would mean that the centrifugal force would have been immense. It would seem that the force would have also flooded the dry land. It could be that Earth had a different shape at that time and was only changed after the impact and then slowed. The hard part is understanding how men and animals could have lived prior to the catastrophic events that must have occurred. However, we are currently sitting on a planet that is spinning at close to 1,000 miles per hour, depending where on Earth you are, and we don't notice any effects from that at this time either. So would we notice the Earth spinning at close to 10,000 miles per hour if the planet had its current shape? There are actually two forces at play, the one thing that holds you to Earth. Gravity and centripetal force, which are actually pretty much the same thing. The opposite is centrifugal force, which would push you away from Earth the faster it spins. However, as the rotational speed increases, so does both the centrifugal and centripetal forces. At some point the centrifugal force would overpower centripetal force and we would be weightless. However, it would have to spin about 17 times faster than it currently does, which would make the day only about 84 minutes long. Perhaps a faster spinning Earth is also the answer to how humans were able to build the Great Pyramids, the ancient ruins in Baalbek, Lebanon, and other megalithic structures found all over Earth. Information indicates what would happen at a faster pace. It reminds me of what the Bible says about separating water above from the water below. I would believe that Eden would have been an area lush with vegetation where every day is perfect. This may have actually accomplished this. Another question is how anything on Earth could have survived an impact such as the even in a boat. If it is true, it must have been a terrible time aboard the Ark. Waves and heights that would have been unimaginable would have seemed to have toppled the Ark. However, the sheer size, divine design of the Ark and of course divine intervention may have helped it stay upright and weather the storm. There would have however been water as well as molten rock raining down from the skies, at least for the initial impact. Unbelievable seismic activity as Earth strained to accept Theia and the literal rebuilding of the landscape. Rapid movements of plates and upheaval of continents would have caused their own tidal waves of immense proportions. I can imagine that the worst part of the movement may have been over in a week or so. Then the earthquakes and volcanoes would have kept things tumultuous for quite some time afterwards. I believe that due to similar spinning of the two planets that the two planets coalesced rather rapidly, and while there would have been much seismic activity, the increase in water depth may have softened the effects, especially if Noah and his ark was on the other side of the world. Other thoughts. There is much conversation online regarding the Younger Dryas impact that many believe to have caused the extinction of many animals on Earth. However, I don't believe that there is a correlation between the two. There are deposits from that event, however they do not cover the entire globe, rather a large swath of land. I believe this to be debris returning to Earth after the creation of the Moon. I believe that it is possible that due to the collision with Theia and Earth that it may have been the cause of the asteroid belt, and that it could at least partially be debris that was also kicked up from the two planets colliding, or perhaps there was another planet that was destroyed by Theia as it basically bounced around our solar system. My brief conclusion. As I learn more, all of these pages will change with other ideas, but for now I do believe that Earth and the heavens and all that is in, on and around it was created by God just as described in the Bible. At the time of his creation he formed dry land along Earth's equator, Pangaea, and water, oceans, as well as our atmosphere, the sky, in a way that would bring the most fruitful and abundant life with animals, plants, and us, humans. A man named Noah was informed by God that he was basically going to hit the reset button and cleanse Earth of all that was there, and that Noah was to build an ark to save those animals we know of today as well as the human race. In order to accomplish this he used another planet and caused it to join with or disturb the Earth he created and change the way Earth would look and move through our solar system forever. In doing so he also created the Moon out of Earth, similar to how he created woman out of man. The creation of this new Earth and the violent way it was completed gave us all of Earth's features we know today, such as mountain ranges, volcanoes, earthquakes and tides, as well as the Moon to give even brighter light at night to rule and control our seas via tides and to slow Earth's rotation. I also believe that the timelines provided in the Bible are accurate for those times, but that the days were shorter as were the seasons.